Hello again, my friend. It's Todd Cetnar, and welcome back to the Three Pillars of Elite Results podcast here on Wisdom Wednesday. And today we welcome in one of the most inspiring individuals that I know. His name is Jason Fowler. If you remember back on episode 6, I did a solo podcast on the riveting story of my friend Jason. You know, Jason was on top of the motocross racing sport from age 6 to 17. He lived just outside of Boston, won 8 New England championships in a 9-year period. But in March of 1991, Jason's life changed forever. I'm going to let Jason tell this story in this amazing podcast. And again, I have the privilege of being a friend of his and ultimately a guy who inspires me every single day for what he does over the last 30 years after a life-changing injury. All right, we got Jason Fowler in the studio today on the Three Pillars of Elite Results podcast. And first and foremost, Jason, welcome to the podcast, man. Pleasure to see you again, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Happy to be with you today.
Absolutely. You know, before we get started, many of my listeners know who you are because when they watch what I do on social media, and I've obviously posted a lot of stuff on keynotes that I've done, and in every keynote, you're in it, thanks to the fact that you've given me a video, a short clip of your story, and I play that pretty much every keynote I've done. So a lot of my listeners have an idea of who you are. But I think where we want to start is if you just think about the 3 pillars of elite results. I talk a lot about how do you face adversity in life, because every time we put our feet on the floor, right, man, adversity hits us. From the minute we get out of bed to when we go back up into bed at night, it's about how do people face adversity, and the people that are most successful, they face adversity the best. And we're going to get to March of 1991 to talk a little bit about your adversity in your life. But let's first talk about, for those of you, the listeners that don't quite know who you are, tell us a little bit about where you are, where you're from, where you grew up, and your hobbies and what you got into.
Yeah. I grew up in Kingston, Massachusetts, and I currently live in Boston. And grew up racing motorcycles. My dad bought me a bike when I was 5 years old and started racing pretty much right away. And we raced 35, 40 weekends a year for about 11 years. And then when I was 17, I had a motorcycle accident. And before this, I had won amateur national championship, or not national championships, but local championships, and second in the country my last year. And then just a little bit about the accident. People are always curious. I was out practicing in a place I had practiced hundreds of times before, and didn't see a rock in some grass. My bike hit the rock. It stopped instantaneously. It sent me flying, I don't know how many feet, kind of head first. And I landed head first. And what happened was it compressed all the way down and broke my spine and then severed my spinal cord. And so what happened was, at that point, halfway down my back at thoracic number 5, it went through my cord. And so I lost feeling from the chest down. And they airlifted me out of the middle of the forest. And the physician after that was like, well, hey, people we got good and bad news. Is, the bad news is you're never going to walk again. The good news is people with your deal, with this circumstances, they go on to live active, normal lives. And I'm like, what is that? And so for me, that journey sort of continued with racing. I started wheelchair racing about 6 months after my accident, and road races, and borrowed a racing wheelchair from a friend of a friend, and then just started going deeper. You start getting into that bug of challenging yourself, just like I did as a young motocross athlete. And I, fast forward 10 years, I did just about 40 marathons, and then got bored with that, and I got into triathlons. And you can imagine just using your upper body for, propelling yourself. I swim with a wetsuit on my lower body and braces to keep them straight. And then I use a hand cycle, so an arm-powered bicycle for the run, or bike. And then for the run, I use a racing wheelchair. And,
Right.
Of course, for me, I always wanted the biggest challenge, right? And so one of my biggest challenges was wanting to take on an Ironman. I saw it on TV one day with one of my childhood heroes growing up, and he did it in a wheelchair on the race. And if you don't know anything about the Ironman, which Todd is getting ready for one, yes. It's 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike, and 26.2 mile marathon, right? So like, how do you do that with just your arms? And I'm going like, the people around me are like, are you crazy? Like, you're
Right.
never going to do that. Like, you
Right.
can't do that with just your arms. And yeah, there was, at this point, there's only a few people in the world that have ever done one. And so I made that my goal. And then so I went through that journey and dove into that and I won 2 Ironman World Championships since, and not without, a lot of struggle, a lot of adversity to get to that point. It took 7 straight years of training and falling on my face over and over. So I always say, you talk a lot about adversity in your intro, and I felt like my accident was a lot of adversity, but I feel like I've had more since my accident and trying to manage living with a body just using my upper body. So it's been interesting, but that for me, the biggest thing I think is just challenging myself and then figuring out how to move forward every day.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. That's great advice. And obviously, for those people that watch this on my YouTube channel, please like and subscribe. But Jason's obviously in a wheelchair. You can't tell from the way he's sitting. He's got a cool little background there in a photo. But Jason, I want to go back for a minute. And I remember you telling me this, and I got a chance to get to know you now through a good buddy of ours, Brian Kane. And one of the things you said was when the accident happened, your mom was at your bedside and she said, you know what, Jason, we're going to give you 2 weeks to feel sorry for yourself. And then we're going to get on and do the best we have with what we got. And I think you reminded me during that moment that kind of set the tone for you. Can you kind of walk us through what that was like for your mom to be that source of inspiration in the moment? I think you were 17 at the time, right?
Yeah. And I'm going like, of course my mom's going to say this, right? Like, and that was just how I was brought up. My dad was always super disciplined, and he went to every single race for all that period of time. And so when that happened, of course it's devastating. Of course, it's sad but it didn't change anything about who they were. And so when they set that tone for me right away, I mean, literally I'm lying in bed, like I can't feel anything. I can't pee. I'm like, just scared. I'm super sick. I'm not in a lot of pain, and they're like, they're getting sick of sitting there for like 2 days or 3 days or whatever it was. And they're like, okay, all right, we're putting a timeline on this. Let's move forward. And so that just sort of set the precedent that, hey, we're moving forward. We're not letting this get us down, and we're moving forward. And when I set that tone, it felt like the people around me, both my friends that were really close, and even the high school, they bought me my first wheelchair. They were just super supportive in that way. So it's interesting how and I see this a lot more now, is like when you set a tone, the people around you start to follow suit, and you bring them up in that same way. But I just needed a little help at first, to do that. I think we all need that support.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and the fact that your parents did that, your mom did that is incredible. And it speaks volumes about them as parents, because a lot of parents will see their kid, their son who just got injured, and it's going to flip their world upside down. Sometimes they're the ones that shell up and aren't sure how to handle it because they're seeing their son that way. But for them to be brave enough to not only handle it that way, but to say the words that obviously propelled you to kind of get back in action in your new life, so to speak. And you mentioned borrowing a bike from a friend of a friend as you got into the hand cycle world. And I think I recall you saying that you were so slow in a 5 mile race that the winner of the race came back 2 miles to greet you. Talk to the listeners about that day.
Yeah. And so, I went from motocross where I was winning races and I felt like I was kind of this hotshot kid, right?
Yeah.
And I went out to my first road race. I thought, how bad can I be, right? And it was a 5 mile race. The winner came back 2 miles. He finished the race, won, came back 2 miles to greet me, or maybe it was even more than that.
Yeah.
And I'm going like, this guy, did you already finish? Like, what happened, right? I was just that slow, and so that moment was really humbling for me, and I think that was probably the hardest time because well, first it was liberating in the sense that it right away, getting in that racing wheelchair, I forgot about my injury. I forgot about what I couldn't do. And it got me redirected and focused on like, hey, there's a challenge in front of me. What are you going to do about the past? And seeing other people around me that were doing cool things. They had already been in a wheelchair for years and they were thriving. and like they're happy and they're out in public, and I'm just sort of like trying to get comfortable with wheeling around in this new bucket I'm in.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that it was a humbling moment, and also just like a turning point where like, okay, it just was reinforced that I had to move forward,
Yeah.
and sports and athletics was the vehicle.
Yeah. So, you talk about your parents, obviously, but did you have another source of inspiration? I heard you say there was a guy that was also in a wheelchair. Did he inspire you? Who was that as you were now navigating through this new life?
Yeah. One of the guys, one of my childhood heroes growing up in motocross, his name was David Bailey, and he won a bunch of world championships as a motocross rider. And he had the same injury as me, I think
Mm.
about 5 years before me. And so I saw him go through that process, and I heard about it. And when I got hurt after that, he was one of the first people I saw. And when he came to Boston for the Boston Marathon one year, when I was happened to be in the hospital, he came and visited,
Wow.
and so like he met with my family, and kind of gave me like, whoa, okay, like this guy's doing it, like I can do it. And so it lit me up, and it just happened to be that 10 years later, I saw him do the Ironman
Right.
in a wheelchair, and I was like, wow, okay, that same guy. And ironically enough, when I went to Ironman in 2009 and won my first time, he was the guy that I was racing, and we battled all day
Wow.
for the entire race. And so the guy that I looked up to and inspired me, he was sort of making a comeback, his final comeback, and he had already won previous, and we battled. And it was just this special moment of being able to share that with him, and also, yeah, just it meant a lot on a lot of different fronts.
Of course it did, I'm sure. So you're getting into this triathlon world at the time, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong on the data, but I think you failed to qualify for 4 straight years, and then it ultimately took you about 7 years to get back on top, where you were as a teenager in New England, just absolutely crushing it, right? So talk to me about the adversity that you faced, like for those 4 years not qualifying, and then going there, and obviously took you 7 years to get back on top now. What, how do you keep going? Some people will do something once, fail, and they're right away, they're like, I can't do it again. But you just kept on pushing through adversity. Talk to the
Yeah.
listeners about how you do that.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? So I went to Ironman for the first time. I qualified my first year of trying. I don't know how, like somehow I want to say I got lucky in 2004, and I got out there. I finished the swim in a horrible time. I got seasick. I went out into the bike, and I knew, so you have to in Ironman you have to finish the swim in a certain amount of time, cumulatively the swim and the bike in a amount of time. And with the hand cycles, we're a little bit slower on the bike,
Yeah.
arms versus leg, and same qualification standards. And I got pulled off the course for not being fast enough at mile 106. So
Oh,
I'm on the course for like almost 9 hours, and I get pulled off the course for missing it by about 16, 17 minutes, somewhere in that range, right? And I'm going, you gotta be kidding me. And so it's devastating. Trained my butt off for 6 straight months after the trials, and to get pulled off the course, I'm like, I'm coming back here and doing it the next year. And I went back to trials, and I missed it by like 20 something minutes. And I'm training hard, but I didn't take it as serious as I should have. And then the next year, the same thing. And so literally 4 straight years. And one year I missed it by a minute and a half, the other minute by 2 minutes. And meanwhile, I'm training every day, basically like 10 months out of the year, and then
yeah.
taking two off so my body can recover. And I'm working on new equipment and making new bikes and all this stuff. And I'm still not getting there. And people are like, around me are going like, why are you doing this to yourself? And I'm like, I just can't give up. I can't give up. And I think, the common thread was that I just kind of developed this, most not kind of, like this was no surprise that I developed this sort of muscle, right? It's why I got into mindset coaching and training in the first
Mm.
place. I think why you are is like, we got to develop this brain and this mental attitude, just like you do in the physical side. And I kind of did it by accident early on through just putting challenges in front of myself, and
Mm.
trying to be better. And so finally I qualified, right? And this is 2008, and I get out there, and it's a really competitive group, and I get second place, and I'm going like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, my goal was to win. And I went back in 2009, which I mentioned, and I won, and I raced my childhood hero, and we had an epic battle, and that felt amazing. And so like overcoming that felt amazing. And at the same time, what I learned from that, there's so many lessons, but the biggest thing I learned was that win wasn't going to make me happy, that wasn't
Right.
going to fulfill me. And so that journey, turned into another one where I was like, okay, now my goal is more fulfillment with the enjoying the process and loving that process of grinding it out every day, which is
Mhm.
kind of leads me to where I am now. But yeah, through that period of time, it was, how do you develop that muscle? And I think the first thing is you have to challenge yourself. And
Mhm.
then once you do that, you have to have, what we said in the beginning is like, you have to have that support system that's going to be there so when you have those bad days, you have to have that mental cue that's like, all right, hey, keep going. Even if you don't feel
Mhm.
like it, like keep going a little bit, like keep going.
Yeah.
And then over time, like I just felt like I got stronger. And I think a great example of this was I did my first half Ironman, right? And I'm like, I wasn't a big kid. I wasn't a strong kid. And half Ironman, the bike is 56 miles.
Sure.
And I got to mile 30 and I was like, I don't know if I could go another 10 feet. My arms were killing, my triceps were burning. I think I'm gonna hurt myself. And I just put one pedal stroke in front of the other. And I basically crawled to the finish line of the bike. And meanwhile, I still have a half marathon to go. And I'm and that year I qualified for Hawaii, and I'm like, how am I ever going to do an Ironman? And literally, it was just every day, just doing a little bit more,
Yeah.
doing a little bit more, and not giving up. And I tell my athletes this: I'm like, the only reason you don't win is you give up,
Right.
and that may take you years, but you have to find a way to enjoy it and find a way to dig deep. So anyways, there's a lot there to
Yeah.
unpack, but that's been my journey and strengthening that muscle.
Yeah, I mean, so many things to pull out of what you said. First of all, a lot of the time I talk about with my clients is process over outcome, and you just kind of stepped on that tool and strategy, which is it's not about the end goal. Like I can't see myself right now finishing a full Ironman in November. I just can't. But what I can see is what my workout is today and just following the process 200 feet at a time. And then I know that by the time I get there, I will be prepared to give it everything I have because I did that for the last 6 months. And it sounds like that's how you did it. It's almost like the saying is do a little, a lot, right? Every
Yeah.
single day, just do a little, a lot. And one of the things you said in the keynote in the video that I play to all of my clients is you say never quit. And you have been the epitome of never quit and the adversity you've faced. And to your point today, the first time I've heard you say is you've probably faced more adversity since the accident, navigating through what you have to go through, and also trying to do it in one of the most grueling races in the world, all right, in a full Ironman. So, talk to us a little bit
Yeah.
about what you have upcoming. Are you involved in any races or registered for races here in 2022?
Yeah. So the way I've done it is I've continued to do Ironman, and I'm making another run at it. The last one was 2019, and I got third place, I guess third place,
Mm.
and I didn't have my best day, and I had some injuries that I've been going through the last 2 years, and so I finally got healthy about 4 or 5 months ago, and I started training again, and so I have the Ironman trials coming up in 5.5 weeks, 5 weeks,
Wow,
and in Luxembourg, and that's the half Ironman. And if I get one or two, I get to go to the Ironman World Championships again in October.
that's great.
So that's again, just getting at it and feel like I'm starting over in a lot of ways because after 2 years off of injury, but just feeling grateful for that opportunity and yeah,
Yeah, that's great. And you just hit on it like gratitude is such a big part of, being able to not only be grateful for what you have, but to wake up every day, have a smile on your face, and that's another way to face adversity. But you chose even through the accident to get after one of the most hardest and grueling races on the planet, and you named what the three legs entail, and I think it's a total of 13 to 17 hours based on the person, right? I think the cutoff is 17 hours, something like that,
yeah.
right? And so the one thing I noticed about you, Jason, whether I'm with you, talking to you, or looking at social media, is you're always smiling. Is that a strategy? Is it? Are you tricking the mind? Is it just your personality? What is it about? Is that how If I look at when I'm out there running or swimming and I'm struggling and it's difficult and I'm getting tested mentally and physically, I never thought about maybe tricking my body and mind by smiling and thinking I'm really enjoying this versus I'm going through a tough time right now. But is that a strategy of yours?
Yeah, you know what? It hasn't been, but I saw many athletes growing up that I always wondered. I was like, because I never did while I was working out or through a lot of this. And to be perfectly clear, like or honest, I'm not always smiling. There's so many times where you can ask the people closest to me, not
Yeah.
so much that I'm smiling, but anyways, but I have used that actually in competitions where I saw that there was this one Natasha Bodman. She's a triathlete from, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and she would always be smiling. You do like this suffering, but she's smiling,
Mm.
and how that brings joy, like sort of. And I say this to my athletes all the time. It's like fake it before you become it,
Yeah.
and so it is a great way to sort of initiate just feeling better
Mm.
when I'm not, like, being able to change your state. That's one thing that I've worked on over the years. Like, how do you change your state in a second, right? It's like create this jolt in your body by smiling, moving your body really quick, and getting your body moving, getting the blood pumping in your movement, and smiling at the same time. Like, it just gives you something. And you know that when you're around happy people, right? There's just something
Absolutely.
about being around happy people. It
Yeah.
just raises you up. A mutual friend of ours, Brian Kane, is like that, where like the guy just has this energy. You're like, all right, and it brings you up. And
Absolutely.
so that type of personality I've always been attracted to. So
Same.
I like to, yeah.
Yeah. Same here, man. So let me ask you a pointed question. If you could define yourself with one word, right? How would you define yourself? How would you sum it up in one word?
One word probably be determined. I think no matter what, I always have felt like I've never been the most naturally talented, like at anything.
Mm.
But there's something inside of me that makes me believe in myself that I developed at an early age. And even though, and I see that about like the smartest people on the planet, whether you're intellectually smart or physically talented and gifted, like there's something inside of me that no matter what, like I feel like if you give me an opportunity, I will go after it and I will beat you, or not even from a competitive perspective, but just from my own, that no matter what, like I'm going to give it everything I have. And I take that into my racing, which is why I think I've excelled at the longer races. Again, I'm not the fastest at road races or marathons. I don't really compete at a high level.
Mm.
And but in a long race, like I'm willing to grind it out with the best in the world, because I just never give up in that way. And my preparation is is um is super high level in that way for a high race. So
Yeah.
yeah, so no matter what happens, there's just something that I believe in myself, and that I'm determined. So maybe believe and determined, or determined is kind of it, I think,
Mm.
no matter what. But just
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. I heard someone say one time, it might have been it might have been Brian, but somebody said, "How you do anything is how you do everything," and I feel like that's kind of how you live your life. It's like there's no corners cut. I'm going to train the way I should train. I'm going to go see the doctors to continue to work on my health. If I'm going to compete, I'm going to compete hard. And that's such a great lesson, especially for young people listening, is how you do anything is how you do everything. And I think that's an important part of this. Speaking of people in our lives, I'm curious of this next question. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you had the opportunity to sit across the table from anybody, whether
mm,
they're with us, dead or alive, pick one or two people, who would they be and why?
mm, interesting. That's a really good question. I think um it's interesting. I saw a documentary on Barack Obama today,
Mm.
not to bring on the political side, but somebody that has like really smart guy, someone who has changed the world in a lot of ways for a lot of people. And there's something about his personality that he brought kind of a different personality to like a political platform that I always sort of thought was really cool.
Mm.
Even if you don't believe in his politics or that component of it, because I didn't ever really follow that part of it. It was just more his
Sure.
personality. And so I would love to, yeah, just talk to him. And I don't know what questions I would ask him, but just to have a conversation, because somebody that could raise himself to that level to be the president of
Mm.
our country, and then also the way in which he did it, I thought just was like nothing we had seen before, and also for a black person, and
Yeah.
just amazing, like what he did, what he's done, or what he continues to do. And so that for me, somebody I look up to, and
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, well, we're in alignment there. Again, politics aside, I think Barack Obama might be the greatest speaker of our time. Unbelievable speaker, right? And just his presence and the way he captivated people was unbelievable and phenomenal. So that's a great
Yeah,
answer to a question
yeah,
that popped on you.
yeah,
Hey, let's take it back for a second. I'm going to get you in some hot seat questions as we close the podcast today.
yeah.
But if you could go back to the teenage years, and it doesn't have to be when you were 17 or during the time of the accident, but just when you were younger, if you could give the younger Jason advice today, what you knew today that you didn't know back then, what would you tell that Jason?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I hadn't actually thought of this question. I've heard of it, but I never really gave it thought. But it comes in an instant. And the first would be is stop caring so much about what other people think.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of got my confidence from success I had in sport, and being able to do things, put goals in front of myself and accomplish them. And then I got more confident in that. And so that period took me a long time to sort of get to who I was, to who I really am. And I wish I got there a little bit sooner.
Mm.
And so I think there was more. I think we all have a blind spot. And I think the more we can push ourselves and challenge ourselves with these bigger things, but you need the confidence to do that. And I think maybe caring too much about what others think from an earlier age, like not knowing that. And again, it's one thing to think it conceptually, but it's another thing to like really feel it in your heart
Yeah, for sure.
and live it. And that I think only comes from going through adversity and going through hard times and challenging yourself. So that would be I think the biggest thing that my younger self.
Yeah, that's a great advice. And we talked a lot about adversity today. And I think the last question I had before I hit you with some hot seat questions is, can you just, I'm sure you know this, but can you just tell our listeners of the accomplishments you've had to date? I know you just did the Boston Marathon, but how many total marathons, how many half Ironmans, how many full, how many world titles?
Yeah. So let's see. Well, I started off with 8 motocross championships and
Yep.
second in the country for my last year, and then over 150 road races. I'm up to almost 50 marathons now. I do at least one a year. Um, I've done over 20 half Ironmans now, I think 22 or 3. I won a half Ironman world championship. I've won 2 Ironman world championships, and I've been to 6, and going for my 7th, or going for my hopefully for my 7th time in the fall. And yeah, at 18 Boston, I just did my 18th Boston Marathon this
Wow.
last month, and so a lot of endurance racing, a lot of pushing myself to that. And in addition, I had a professional career, got my MBA, my undergrad in business administration, and then got my
Fantastic.
MBA, and went on to work for a medical device company for 20 years and do that. And now I'm a mindset coach. So that I kind of put that in the same bucket of just being a well-rounded individual. And those Ironman World Championships were when I was working 40 to 50 hours a week. So
I understand.
that for me is probably as tough as most of you guys know
Yeah.
that are listening, is that you work, and like I was doing it while doing that.
Yeah.
So that's yeah.
Fantastic, man. Well, congratulations on the success you have already accomplished, and I'm going to congratulate on what you will accomplish, because I know there's many more in the tank for you. So before we wrap it up, all you have to do is, when I ask the question, just give me your gut answer, right? Good, quick gut answer. And if we want to do some explanation around it, we can. So here we go. Hot seat question with Jason Fowler. First question is, last meal, anything you can have, what would you choose?
Probably a steak, even though I've been vegetarian for 12 years.
There you go. Change it up for the last day. All right. Favorite smell?
Lemon.
Favorite movie of all time?
Rudy, probably. Yeah.
Inspirational
I've
as they
watched that
come,
around
right?
probably 20 times, that movie. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Favorite triathlon race to do for those people getting involved, whether it's Ironman or not. What's your favorite race location?
Yeah, it has to be Hawaii, just because of the location and the toughness part of it. And being on a bike course that you can, see for 30 miles in front of you and on this amazing vista.
That's
Absolutely.
awesome.
Otherwise, probably the best Boston Marathon is pretty cool.
Yeah, cool and exciting and a lot of energy, I'm sure. All right, favorite app on your phone to date right now?
Uh, Probably Whoop. Yeah, I
Right,
guess
yep.
it's yeah, my activity tracker and recovery device. Yeah.
Got it. Yep. Whoop fitness tracker. Okay. Um, what is the current background on your phone?
It is the same as the picture right here.
The lion.
The lion, yeah.
That's awesome, man. That'll get you up every day. All right.
Absolutely.
And whether you're training, you're in the car, what is the one song that when this song comes on, it just gets you so fired up, you're ready to roll?
Rocky.
The
Yeah.
Eye of the
Any of
Tiger?
the Rocky soundtrack.
Yeah, or
Any
the
Eye of the
whole.
Tiger, absolutely. Eye of the Tiger was my number one from like the time I was like 13 years old or 12 years old. I would hear that. And so when I hear that now, like no matter what, yeah. But any of the Rocky soundtrack, I'll
Yeah. Rocky
just fire
4 is
it up.
fantastic. That's one of the best
Yeah.
soundtracks out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, before we wrap this up, I always like to leave, ask my guests to leave with one question, which is my question to you would be, what are some parting words that you would like to give our listeners today from you, Jason?
Uh, I think for me, when I look at the threads of things that are most important in my life, is first is challenge yourself more than you ever thought. So if you think it's a or a half Ironman or a half marathon that you're going to do a full. Like no matter what it is, there's so much more in the tank that you can do, and I think that no matter what, having a support system around you that so when you fail or when you don't do what you need or you need more extra motivation, you have that person or those people to rely on so that you rise yourself up and be after that. And the last is enjoy the ride, man. Like I've had to really coach myself through this over the last like 20 years of like, because when you're working, you're hard and we're all like striving for things, like really getting to that point where you're fulfilled. I feel like success and fulfillment are totally different things, or happiness and fulfillment, right? Um, or success, right? Or financial is very different than the mindset component of it, and work on that. It takes practice. Find a mindset coach and to help you with that. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. I think for anyone listening, you can start with me as your mindset coach. So I'll put a plug in for myself. But Jason, thank you so much, man. This is one of my favorite podcasts to date. I'm not ashamed to say that for all my other guests that's been on. But I just enjoy talking to you because you're one of those guys that lifts people up. And, for my listeners out there that continue to follow me, mental performance 101 in my mind is understanding that it's not what happens to you in life. It's how you handle it. And Jason, you are the epitome of what mental performance mastery stands for, because not only did you face adversity as a young age, but every single day you face adversity with what you go through, and you handle it like a champ. And people that follow you, and if they don't, you should please follow Jason Fowler on his journey, because you will be inspired. So Jason, thanks so much for your time today, man. I appreciate it.
thanks for having me on. Yeah, go get it, guys.
Today is up to you. Take inspired action and don't count the days, make the days count.